NEK-TV Rocks. My guest today is Mayor Linda Joy Sullivan. And what are we talking about today?
So we're going to be talking about human trafficking, a little insight into it, and I thank you for letting me be here to do this.
It's an important issue, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what trafficking is and what it isn't.
And the types
of
trafficking, and there's a lot of myths out there about how people should react, and when somebody really is trafficked and when somebody isn't trafficked. And that's why it's important for people to get a solid understanding of what's going on in human trafficking. It's one of the highest revenue generators in the world, and that is sad.
It really is.
I mean, sad. And how do we stop it? And and what's going on in Vermont.
And Newport. What's happening in Newport.
Specific as well. And all of the byproducts that come out of it, and how the schools could work to assist getting awareness out there. We need to watch gangs that are being recruited to go into the schools, and different types of situations that you would never imagine could lead to trafficking.
So let's start with the definition.
Okay, so I want to be real careful about giving a definition of human trafficking because it's divided. We have labor trafficking, we have human trafficking, there's a division of child trafficking, but force, fraud, and coercion are elements, and then eventually a dollar amount to conclude a debt. But that doesn't necessarily flow down to child trafficking, so that's different. What I do want to say is we are having a full-blown community forum on this. This is how important this is, and I'm going to say September, and you're going to say the date.
I believe it's the 26th. Or the 25th now.
It's the Wednesday. So I think it's the Wednesday 25th. Is the 25th.
But we'll put an announcement at the end of this.
Right. And the reason I want to bring that up here is because that's going to be an in-depth hit and discussion on human trafficking, Newport specific, what's going on in Vermont, on Orleans County, but specifically we're going to hit Newport, and we're going to have some top professionals coming in on this one. And it's going to be at the Gateway, and open discussion, open questions from the residents. And so I encourage everybody to get to come and hear
we'll put an announcement out about that. I think if you ask anybody on the street, the immediate assumption is we're talking about sex trafficking. But it's way more than that.
Well, and it goes a little bit further. The assumption is prostitution. Okay?
Which is all about blame the victim.
Blame the victim, But even if somebody chooses that profession, it does not necessarily mean that they can't be trafficked. As well. So, the acceptance, the willingness, and people sometimes believe that, well, if they've already been out there on the street, they can't then claim they were trafficked. Well, there's all different elements that says that's not true. And that's what we want to bring out in the bigger community forum, because that awareness is important and it's not just females.
Far from it.
It's males, females, all genders. I mean, it's out there. Anybody can be trafficked. And the worst part is if you are trafficked for a long time and you hit certain age, it can turn into a byproduct of organ trafficking. Which is an even higher dollar value now. And moving people outside of states into different countries, and then we fall into the transportation part of it, which is the Mann Act. And so, human trafficking on the sex side versus the labor side, different elements. And from labor, sometimes you end up being moved into sex trafficking. So there's an overlap. It would be rare that it would be sex trafficking to labor trafficking, but it could happen. And so, or that some areas overlap. And my big concern today would be to let parents know that a person can be trafficked just through a dating process. And they need to be very careful. And how in Newport we have, drugs that turn it into people having to go out and be trafficked. Right. And so we have a lot going on here that are the true elements of trafficking.
It is complicated.
It's very complicated, but it can be simplified, and the whole grooming process will be explained when we do the community forum. What I want people to understand is that there is a grooming process. So that is called like the dating process of your the trafficker who grooms the person, gets them reliant, gets them beautiful gifts, gets them dependent, makes them fall in love, gets their trust, and then turns them out.
Right.
Okay. And that's where it all begins. Then there's also issues with when somebody is trafficked. People say, well, why don't they just leave?
It's not that easy.
It's not that easy, okay? And so sometimes you will find that traffickers or the whole organization of the trafficking of specific groups, they may bring in clergymen. Right. Or people dressed as clergymen to get that understanding that you can't go to your clergy because they're involved.
Because they're not safe.
Any officers, police officers, army, anything they can do, nurses. So they try to prohibit the people from reaching out. Right. And if you are obedient, they may give you a little benefit. For example, okay, we'll let you go across the street to that store, but that store knows. Okay, so you're coming back. Right. And it's a whole loss of dignity and a whole loss of esteem, and then you're in, and you just can't get out. I mean, and we're trying to put together as many laws as possible. There's organizations out there. Collaboration is the key. But the other point I'd like to make is that people, because their hearts go out once they say, oh my goodness, we want to do something, they should not individually go out and interfere. They may see a couple standing on the street and they say, you know what, that has all the signs of trafficking. I'm going to walk over there.
That's how to get killed.
That's how to, not only that, but it's also how to push that one who's being trafficked further underground. And causing, or killed, correct. And so those there are hotlines that should be called immediately, the police. It's okay to call if you believe something is going on. We want you to do that, but let the officials handle it, because it is such an organized crime that you alone can't step in and fix it, but you can definitely participate in getting awareness out, and that's where we need the public. We need the public there.
I think one of the pieces where the mindset has to change is we've sort of become accustomed to see people as a commodity. We're not a commodity, but we are seen in that way. And until we can switch that, it's really hard to attach it to other parts of what is trafficking and what isn't trafficking.
Well, you're right. You hit it, because I mean, go back, from anthropology to sociology, and and that's exactly where human beings have become. We went from a community of rational human beings that distinguished us from the certain hierarchy of animals, and now we're individuals competing.
Except we're not. Corporations own us.
Right, but what I'm saying is, you're competing, and you're competing for what you consider your survival is the richer, the better, or whatever it is. And so you're spot on that. And so you will find also that there's a grooming process, and when after the trafficker goes through their initial grooming process, then their victims are moved into maybe a brothel or a hierarchy there, and then it gets really bad sometimes, where they will have guerrilla traffickers come in, and the beatings, and show the victims what will happen if. I mean, there was a case I worked on one time where there was literally the brand of the trafficker was tattooed across the victim's eyes. I mean, that's how
awful
horrific
it is.
It is. And then, of course, there's, victims who have babies. And then that can work in several ways. I mean, that can turn into a black market, or it can turn into, well, if this particular victim does manage to get out, I'm the father, so I have parental rights, and I have that continued control. So this whole continual mindset, this traumatic experience, and I couldn't even begin to try to experience, what that is.
Right.
But I've seen it because I work with over 3,000 victims of human trafficking and have lectured on it. There's terminology that people need to be aware of, which is horrific. You'll have young children who are trafficked, and the term of like, oh, it's time for your feeding, that's the sexual act, that's the trafficking act. So, you'll have innocent attorneys or judges who want to help, and you see a child and it's like the first thing you say is, when's the last time you saw your daddy? Well, okay, that's an issue. When's the last time you were fed? And they start to transfer, and you become their new trafficker in their mind. So all of these elements are far more complicated than the public understands, but it's happening. It's happening right here. And we have a lot of isolated homes close by.
Yes.
We're by international waters.
Yes.
We're by exits on the state highways. So it's easy to get in and out and move these victims.
Right.
And it's easy to entice, oh, come on over, I want to show you this great new house I bought. And then you go into the house and you're there. Right. And so, and people aren't aware because our culture is such that we have certain beliefs that everybody's entitled to. Everybody's entitled to their own belief. But, if I had a specific religious belief and I just don't want to look at this, I'm going to say it's not trafficking, shame on that person. And so it is so horrific, really horrific.
We also have stereotypes, and we are very good at saying it's over there, it's not in my community.
That's right.
That's not true.
Not in my backyard, right?
Exactly.
NIMBY, not in my backyard. Absolutely not true.
As much as we other people, if othering is a real skill, and we're doing really well with that one, if we make people who are being trafficked or being persecuted in other ways into other, then they're not real people. It's really easy to then ignore it.
That's what we do.
It's a good one to blow apart, though.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. Yeah. And so, I went to Boston for the National Conference for Women's Commissioners.
Yeah.
And one of the presenters did a very simple and clear presentation on awareness. They didn't get into the details and elements that we will be getting into at the forum.
Yeah.
But it was very helpful to see that other states are saying, you know what, this is not good. What can we do? And so they're going into awareness. They decided to work with the Rotaries in their state. I want to say this was California, but I might be mistaken. I think it was California. And that is very important because the Rotaries have been known to, fund awareness and human trafficking. And so I'm hoping that they will participate as well in this forum. We will invite them. But the more people that understand the hotlines that are out there, that this is a serious situation. This is one of the highest revenue generations in the world. Okay, this is the business.
Yes.
And, hospitals participate in helping and awareness. Victims need to be brought to hospitals. They need to be safe. And there are organizations that I've worked with where sometimes you need to fly these victims out and get them home, underground flights. So there are a lot of organizations working. The Truckers for Trafficking. I love the Truckers for Trafficking. Okay, I can't even explain how wonderful they are. Okay, everybody is out there. People who you wouldn't think who have organized to help. And that's like so important.
Because the stereotype so often is it's an illegal. Now, in my belief system, nobody's illegal. But the belief is it's an illegal person, therefore they should be caught and deported. And that message is given to people who are being trafficked too. So if you go to a hospital, of course you're going to want to protect yourself, because it may be horrific what you're living in right now, but you really believe, or part of you wants to believe, that you can escape from where you are currently and continue to live here, or go to one of those immigration centers that are pretty awful.
But you're right again, because that is part of the grooming process. So after they go through the grooming process, the fall in love romantic part, and then they're brought to where they need to be trafficked, that's the fear tactic.
But it works.
You bet it works.
Not only does it work, it's real.
Okay, I know it's real.
I lived and worked in Philadelphia.
Right.
And I've seen ICE come in and remove people. It's not okay.
Right, but what I'm saying is that is not only is it not good, okay, that's why they need to work, and hopefully, like the organization that I had founded, work very closely with them, where they did not remove people like that. We would sit down and they would have one of the team from the organization do the interviewing with and help decide what elements were there. And these people were not retaliated against. They were moved to safekeeping. And you have to remember, too, a victim is also afraid to testify.
Of course.
Because they have to face their trafficker.
Yes.
And they have to go through the whole process again.
Right.
You know, so another area that is important to look at is when somebody comes in to, say, defend you as a victim, like, who's paying for them?
Right.
Okay, that would be like my first question all the time. Who's paying those legal fees, right? All right, and so there's so many elements here.
There are.
And the whole grooming process doesn't stop. So there's like that romantic grooming process, and then it's more and more and more. And there's all different categories that we have names for this and examples, and we will be covering that at the community forum. My hope there is that people walk out and they don't just go, wow, they go, wow. Okay, and now we know what we should do, how we should work with the police if we see something, how we should get awareness out, how we should protect our kids, and how we should collaborate with the principals, and there should be this education around. And definitely when we see these empty homes here, that's important too, because if I'm a trafficker and I see vacant homes, my eyes light up.
Of course.
And it's in the community and it's comfortable. But, you know, let's deal with just Newport with the drug issue.
Right.
Okay, so I'm there. I need my drugs. I go, I get my fix. And I need it. And now you're going to go out. And you owe me.
That's right,
and
big
the
time.
debt's created. And those people are trafficked. And then maybe those people are used to transport or to possibly kidnap or lure other victims in. And it's an ongoing, organized situation. Yeah, there's some wise guys out there. Okay, and there's some gang level wise guys, but the bigger part is organized. And it's just such a horrific thing. I mean, it's you said it. It's not good. We can't do this. We just can't do this.
It's at so many different levels, because without migrant workers, our farms in Vermont can't survive. And yet, for some of the migrant workers, that's trafficking. Not true for everybody. But how do you begin to address that?
And that's, you're right.
Yeah.
And that's the labor trafficking portion.
Yes.
And we are
It's
going
real.
to
It's very
and I
real.
don't think there's anybody who thinks it's not. I mean, there
Right.
might be some public misguided thoughts that it's not real. It's very real. Okay.
But if you can't milk your cows or you can't pick your crops,
Mm-hmm.
there are ways of doing some of it legally, but it's really hard to do. How do you change that?
And so there are collaborations and organizations that are working to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're going to talk about as well. And that's the whole part of the labor trafficking,
Right.
which is entirely different than the sex. Okay, sex trafficking is the exploitation.
Oh, yes.
Okay, and then there's, you know,
Labor trafficking is exploitation too.
yes, but it's definitely exploitation. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying one is purely an exploitation style. Let's exploit them sexually. Labor trafficking is a mix. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So labor trafficking is even more difficult. Okay, so because labor trafficking combines so many different elements of trafficking.
Yes.
And so you have to look at that, and then you have to be cautious, and you have to say, the goal, we hope, is, of course, to break the trafficking organization, but your main goal should be to save the victim. And then you have that conflict of, well, if I save the victim, will the victim really does the victim want out? And of course, that doesn't matter, okay, because the victim is never going to say they want out. Of course they want out, okay? But the thing is, how do you do it to protect them? And how do you protect them from something they may have left that was so more horrific?
Exactly.
And if they go back,
Exactly.
will they be further trafficked there or killed there?
Yeah.
So...
And if we keep it on labor trafficking for a minute, I'm not sure always the victims want to be, quote, saved. What they want is to be free to earn a decent living
Right.
under reasonable terms, do a fair job and get paid a fair wage and have a decent living situation, which of course many of them don't.
And that's an assessment that is done when people look at these different organizations of rural labor trafficking is going in, whether it be farming, whether it be just the local business, okay?
Right.
You know, people should pay attention because sometimes in just your basic businesses, there's trafficking going
Yes, there
on.
is.
You know, people envision, oh, it has to be a brothel.
Oh, no.
No. Okay.
No.
And I'm just going to use the most simple one, which is a massage parlor. That sometimes that can turn into something, you know, or
A happy ending.
Yeah, exactly. But labor trafficking is complex, and labor trafficking, and so is sex trafficking. But labor trafficking has different elements.
Yes.
And I think the key is that the venues for labor trafficking are reported fewer times than the brothels,
Of course,
would be reported. But there's most often a tie between the venues of labor trafficking
Indeed.
and where they end up in the brothels and so on. You know?
and we all collude with labor trafficking.
Well, that's
because
the key.
we want the end
Well, we're
product.
business. We're purchasers.
That's right.
We're purchasers
So we
of
collude.
the product. Yeah, and so
we act judgmental about brothels because heaven forbid anybody should sell sex.
But it's the same.
Yes.
It's one in the same, you know, because the elements, the legal elements may be a little different.
Right.
But it doesn't mean you can't prove it. And so I think people are focusing on the labor trafficking more and more and more. I believe they were focusing on labor trafficking originally in a strong way because they realized that from labor trafficking, they were turned out for sex trafficking or their families were to pay off the debt. But now they realize labor trafficking is big money.
Yes.
Big money.
And it's sure not going to the workers.
Right, and you have to remember too, where by the waters, you know, you go on the water, it's a different law. Admiralty law and international law is different than when you're here in the state and then you start to be transported out of a state. That's where the Mann Act comes in.
Yes.
And so there's different elements to all of these areas. And I think it's so important that when somebody comes in to negotiate, also be fair to the person coming in to negotiate their job, because if they are from a different country and they are going to negotiate at what they know, not what other people say here in the state would need to live. And so they don't know, and they won't be able to really live. So that kind of awareness through businesses, the legitimate businesses, has been going on as well.
Of course.
And you will get businesses who will have trainings on that type of trafficking, so that employees can feel comfortable. There are ways people to speak to. And that's what's needed, and that's what's needed here in Vermont.
Yeah,
big time. I know that there's DCF, the children and families, as they work as well. There's task force, but the organization Polaris, which is out of DC, they have really good statistics, and they have a hotline, and they will help participate in sharing like whatever we put out.
That's great.
Yeah, very good. And it's out there. The key here is that Vermont is not looking the other way when it comes to human trafficking. Vermont is active.
That's good. Is anybody working with the police?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of training happening.
Oh, totally, absolutely. In fact, that's why when we're doing this forum, I contacted, the Department of Justice, I contacted the FBI, I contacted the police, and we're going to have all the experts here. And the first thing that they said to me was, oh, absolutely, we will be there. They were like, within 30 minutes, they called me back and said, how do we get involved? What do you want us to do? What type of training do you want? What do you want us to talk about?
Good.
And so I'm really eager for this particular forum, and I'm hoping people show up because this is serious.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
And this creates further crime, and it stems from crime. And everybody wants Newport to be crime-free. It's our city, right? Well, in order to do that, we need to focus on what's creating the trafficking, what's coming out of the trafficking, how do we clean it up,
and who's winning.
There we
Who
go.
is winning?
Who's winning?
Who is at the top?
That's right. That's right. And it's very difficult to bring down the kingpin.
Correct.
Right? But it can be done. I mean, remember in typical, movies, organized crime, it was all brought, and today it was taxes. They didn't pay their taxes. Now
they still don't.
Well, but they've done it in a more sophisticated way because they've hired sophisticated corporate lawyers, and they set it up, and they're entitled to use the code and structure it. And but it's not that old, more animalistic style. Okay, so drugs, sex, trafficking, there are people who are not only domestic, but, international who are running it. We're not dealing with just, this is Vermont human trafficking.
Right.
We're dealing with the world and the trainings. And you just send one trained trafficker over.
Yep.
And, you could lose 100 people.
Very easily.
To that, very easily. And the further they go underground, the more difficult it is.
We still have a mindset that has accepted slavery, it's accepted indentured servitude, and still, if you ask a lot of people, doesn't see any issues there. It's really hard to get the next step, which is, and look what's still happening, because there's a belief that that isn't still happening. But it is.
Now look at The Handmaid's Tale.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Okay.
You want some modern?
You don't want me to go there.
Well, actually, I do.
But what I'm saying is, but you're right, because it's mindsets, and then it's also your own culture and your own upbringing and your own definitions and parental guidance. And can you, as an individual, take a deep breath and say, okay, wait a minute, this is not the way I was brought up, or this I was taught, and this is not something I can just look the other way on. This is something that I need to know how to help, without doing it on my own. Don't run amok, okay? But how do I say, no, this is not okay?
And Project 25 does not have to be reality.
Right. But what I'm saying is like the particular individuals do not have to be afraid as well, because you will find people who want to help who are afraid to step out.
Right.
Because they're afraid of what their neighbors will say or their political opinions will be. Even if they sincerely care, they feel, well, I will be persecuted.
And they could be.
But that's correct. So where do you get the strength to say, I can come out?
And if you've survived domestic violence, you're even more cautious because you've been down that road.
Well, that's exactly right, because this is domestic violence.
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, what they're doing is they're turning around and saying, well, we're going to do sex trafficking, and we're going to put the implementations of domestic violence to keep you lower and lower and lower and lower.
And it's not just one ugly partner, it's a big organization at the top.
Not only that, I mean, you have many partners.
Right.
Okay, so how much abuse can you take?
Right.
And then and how much can your body take? And then at what point in time, remember, you're turned out. Let's say you're turned out for a sex act. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter if you have a foot. We can get rid of your foot because the sex act is still workable. Okay, so
in fact, you get sympathy points if you.
That's correct.
And that's reality.
That's the reality. And the whole mindset of our civilized human beings, when I see them separating and being afraid to speak out, or, we're dealing with not just, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be civilized man. That means we're rational, and it keeps us united, and it keeps us watching out for one another. And I want to believe that.
And we are connected. And how do we restore those connections? Which is really what
without
this comes
attack.
down to. Right.
I mean, we've seen it just as ridiculous attacks just in our council meetings. I mean, if you
we have indeed.
Okay, I mean, it's just like you sit there and you go, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
But that's what they are. They're just boisterous, and they're just going to say things even though they don't have the actual details or elements, and they design things the way they want.
Or they make them up.
Or they make them up. Right.
As we see at the very top.
That's right. And but that's the propaganda.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that the more forums, and this particular community forum, will help. And also let the public know they don't need to be afraid.
Right.
And there are ways for them to reach out. And it's okay to organize doing appropriate awareness.
Right.
And that, I'm hoping, will bring Newport together. And so that's my goal here.
Well, that's a really good place for us to stop. Because we're out to start and stop today.
Right.
And we will put out information about this forum, which is really important.
It's so very important.
It really
and there'll
is.
be an agenda, and there'll be details. And
that is
I will
great.
tell you that, I just want 3 seconds, because what we are going to be talking about, we're going to be distinguishing between the myth and reality of trafficking. We're going to talk about the distinctions between sex and labor trafficking.
Good.
And we're going to start low and go high. We're going to go into the definitions. We're going to put the characteristics of who could be pulled in, who's at risk. And we're going to understand the paradigm of trafficking and the whole psychology of the pimp.
Right.
Okay, and everybody knows the Stockholm syndrome, but we're going to talk about the pimp side of the syndrome, which is just as bad, and then what you should do. So I'm looking forward to your pushing this. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming in and talking about this. And
we're just beginning.
That's right.
We're just beginning.
And it's a good way for Newport to come together.
I think so. Thank you for this. This is
great. Thank you. It was fun.